Thanks, everyone, joining for this great opportunity to learn about clustering K-means and applying it to college baseball, D1 specifically. So to get started, we'll load in our libraries. If you don't have these packages installed, just simply install that packages. We're going to use Tidyverse, Cluster, and Facto Extra. So no baseball R today. I already have the data frames already in place, so I'll let you kind of peek into it. So like this is team batting. It has team ID, conference ID, year, division, just totals. Batting average, on base percentage, slugging, runs, so on and so forth, and it's separated by team. And then it has kind of tournament appearance, College World Series appearance, College World Series final, College World Series championship, K minus BB percentage, strikeout percentage, walk percentage, stuff like that. And then I'll show you pitching as well, so we can kind of view these and merge these together, things of that nature. So, yeah, hits allowed, runs allowed. It's basically a lot of allows. Strikeout minus, strikeout percentage, walk percentage, strikeout minus BB, strikeout BB ratio, FIP, batting average, OBP, slugging, OPS, ground out, fly out. Now that we have these three libraries loaded, I'm going to show you again my correlation matrix. And what this basically tells you is, how much of a relationship is a certain statistic to, in this case, getting in the tournament. So obviously the biggest one is 1-to-1 is tournament appearance with itself. But we can see that strikeout to walk ratio has a 0.4 R squared, very high correlation there. And then you kind of go down the line. Runs per PA and runs allowed, stuff along those lines in terms of runs. I feel like that's important. I should mention that, if you want to get in a tournament at any level, just consistently outscore your opponent. Just have a high run differential. But I'm kind of asking, what leads to those runs? What are big factors into getting more runs? So, or on the pitching side, what's big factors into allowing few runs? So looking at this, we see that strikeout to walk ratio is a pretty high one. And then on the negative side, OBP allowed, batting average against, OPS, runs allowed for batter face, ERA, stuff like that, has a high negative correlation, which essentially means that as the year OBP allowed increases, you're less likely to make it into the tournament. So what I did here was I selected specific variables from a cutoff for hitting and pitching. So I think I selected 7 different variables from each side. So 7 hitting variables, 7 pitching variables. The threshold I had for pitching was it had to be a 0.35 correlation or better. Either way, to be able to find a basic relationship. So what I kept was strikeout to walk ratio. I did not keep strikeout percentage. I will say that to make it even with the hitting statistics. On base percentage allowed. I'm not using runs allowed per batter's face because, again, runs are a direct thing of getting into the tournament, just consistently outscore your opponents. But that being said, OBP allowed, batting average against, OPS allowed, ERA, slugging allowed, FIP. On the hitting side, I set the threshold for 0.25, so I kept only variables that had a 0.25 or higher, so home runs per plate appearance, isolated power, batting average, slugging percentage, on-base percentage, OPS. Again, I didn't keep anything related to runs. And then on the negative side, I kept strikeout minus walk percentage. So think strikeout percentage minus walk percentage. In this case, as that number increases, you're less likely to make a tournament because it's from the hitter side. So I have College World Series appearance, batting average, OBP, slugging, OPS, ISO, isolated power, which is slugging percentage minus batting average, which is a measure of a player's raw power, or in this case, a team's raw power. So the higher it is, the more raw power you have. Home runs, strikeout minus walk percentage, ERA, FIP, batting average against, OBP allowed, slugging allowed, OPS allowed, and then strikeout to walk ratio. What we're going to do first is we're going to create a new data frame, and we're going to say df equals all data to, which is something I saved, already. And I said select, we'll say school, year, tournament appearance, batting average, OBP, slugging, OPS, ISO, and then home runs per PA, and then strikeout minus walk percentage, as well as on the pitching side, ERA, FIP, batting average against, OBP allowed, slugging allowed, OPS against, and then strikeout to walk ratio. So now that we have that in there, we're now going to create another variable called school year. So DF school year with that $sign to create a new variable. And we're going to do a paste 0. What essentially it does, it takes, in this case, it takes the values from school and combines the values from year with a dash in between. Row names of DF and then DF, comma, school year. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm setting those row names of the school year column. You can see the row names are listed as such. So now we're going to remove those non-numeric variables. School, year, and school year. Then lastly, we are going to check for NAs. So sum.is.na, df. And there are none, so that's good. K-means clustering is a unsupervised machine learning algorithm, which basically partitions or kind of splits data into a set of K-groups. K-groups is pre-specified by the analyst, so in this case, me. But there are methods to kind of find the optimal number of K. Each cluster has what is called a centroid, and a centroid basically computes that distance from a certain cluster. And how we're going to get that distance is first we're going to scale our data. So scaling that data allows us to kind of measure and identify variables. That way we don't have certain variables that take a stronger effect than others, like df, scale, df. And before I run this, I'll show you what the data frame looks like right now. So again, you've seen this batting average listed. But then once I scale it, now you can kind of see it looks a lot different and a lot more scaled to kind of what those points are. But what I like to do is first to remove repeat sampling is I'll set a seed. You can pick any number really. Don't pick too large of a number. K2, use the k-means function. And we'll say data frame centers equals 2. End start equals 25. You can use, since this is not really that big of a data set, since there's only 2,000 variables, this is a visualization of said clusters. So we ran this k-means, and then we have our data equals df, and you can kind of see the red should probably mean along the lines of these teams did get into the tournament, and then the blue is along the lines of these teams did not get into the tournament. I'll add a third centroid or a third cluster. Either way, you can mention it. Now we'll do a fourth one and we'll do a fifth one. So we'll find 4. So k-means, centers 4, end start 25. Now you can start to see a little bit more color as well. So now we have kind of like a green, a pink, a bluish, and then a lighter blue. So that's kind of confusing. But anyways, now we're getting to the point where green are the teams that may be great at hitting or maybe great at pitching, but they aren't the best at both. The blue is really those guys are either really good at pitching but not so good at hitting, or really good at hitting, not so good at pitching. The kind of purple over here is kind of they're not very good. And down here, the red is usually the teams that are great at hitting, but really, really bad at pitching, or just have a poor pitching staff. Now we're going to do a fifth cluster. We'll say 5. K5. So now we're going to have 5 clusters, and I'll kind of break this down some more. So again, we have 5 clusters. We have now we have like a pink over here, a darker green, a lighter green, bluish purple, and then kind of a little bit more blue down here. FViz underscore, not cluster, NB cluster. So basically number of optimal clusters. And we'll say DF, our function is k-means, and our method is within sum of squares. We'll run this, and I'll show this to you. So this is showing you within sum of squares, and then it's showing you kind of like an elbow type plot. So I will break this down. Let me expand this a little bit more so you can see it a little bit better. But what we're going to say here is simply this. In this plot, the optimal number of clusters is when you start to see kind of a bending point, or when you see, as they say, bend the knee. So you can say 3 could be a good one, but I would say 4 in this case is when it really bends. Predicting. And we can kind of break this down for everybody to be able to break down into how can we see these clusters and see, well, did they get into the tournament? How often did teams within these clusters got into the tournament, and so on and so forth. So basically this computes the averages of those clusters of those statistics we mentioned earlier. So batting average, OBP, slugging, OPS, ISO, home runs, strikeout to walk percentage, ERA, FIP, strikeout to walk ratio, batting average against, OBP against, slugging against, OPS against. So we'll say, for now, we'll add a column called cluster. We'll say D1 data mutate cluster equals K4 cluster, and then piping operator, continue our code, and we'll say group by, because we want to put those back into groups. So we're going to group by cluster, and then we're going to say summarize. I cannot spell summarize. Summarize all, and what function we want to use. I would like to use the mean. So the highest tournament appearances, you'll see a lot of 1s compared to 0. So on average, looks like 74.4. So that means you'll see roughly 75-ish% of teams get into the tournament with these metrics. So you see that they have the best pitching staff, lowest FIP, lowest batting average against, lowest OBP against, lowest slugging against, lowest OPS against, and the highest strikeout to walk ratio. Strikeout to walk ratio is so important. Look at how high this is. Like everywhere else, it's pretty low, but 74.4% chance of getting into the tournament. If you have the best pitching staff, have a great pitching staff, but at the same time, don't have a crap hitting team. So, I mean, based on this, yeah, you're pretty much a run better. So there's a good chance that if you are a really good pitching team but not so good hitting team, based on this, you have roughly, we'll say, a 40% chance. But this first cluster, they have the best hitting team. So they have 4 points higher batting average than cluster 2, 3 points higher OBP than cluster 2, 23 points higher in slugging. So overall, it's roughly 30 points higher in OPS. Isolated power, about 20 points more. And they hit a little bit more in home runs. They strike out a little bit more than they walk. But the difference is they don't have as good an ERA. So they're not the worst pitching team, but they're the second worst. So if you drop that ERA by a full run, there's a good chance you're getting into the tournament. The third cluster, a 6% chance of getting into the tournament. 265, 351, 362. So this is kind of a weak power hitting team. But they do take walks, but they don't really. They're the type of team that is a little bit more indisciplined, but really struggle at hitting for power. And then they have about a league average ERA, and then all of their metrics are around league average pitching wise. So, and they have the second best strikeout to walk ratio. So this is a more disciplined team. And the last one are kind of the worst of the worst. There's a 1.9% chance of getting in, and I can almost guarantee that of all of them, none of them are at-large tournament appearances. All of them are winning that conference tournament. Now what we'll do is we'll create a column called cluster. Now we can do Virginia in 2014. So Virginia, they weren't necessarily the best in OPS that year. They were actually a pretty low ISO team. They're more of a pitching team. So looking at this again, 2.23 ERA, that's ridiculous. The team OPS allowed of 550 and a 2.8 strikeout to walk ratio. Again, for all of these, for teams that want to get into the tournament, high strikeout to walk ratio. And then hitting wise, look how low that is, 1.7% difference. So that's essentially saying that, let's say they struck out 18% of the time, and let's say they struck out 18% of the time. That means they walked roughly 16.3% of the time. So it's pretty much on level. I definitely hope you guys learned a thing or two from this video, and I really appreciate you tuning in, and I can't wait to feature more college baseball content. Thanks for watching, guys.